The temperature on the old highway north of Sudbury had already fallen to -32 by the time Robyn Calloway's Subaru hit the patch of black ice and spun sideways into the ditch. She was 46 years old. She was 19 kilometers from the nearest gas station, on a secondary road that nobody had any reason to drive in November. Her cell phone showed no signal and 2% battery. She had maybe 25 minutes, 30 if she was lucky, before her body would start to betray her in the ways that bodies do when the cold gets serious. And then, through the screen of black spruce on the far side of the ditch, she saw the shape of a roofline. But that wasn't where Robyn's story started. It started 4 months earlier, in the kitchen of the house she had shared with her husband Malcolm for 19 years, at 7:15 in the morning, when she watched him reach for his coffee mug and simply fall. Malcolm Calloway had been 51 years old and in what everyone assumed was perfect health. The autopsy said cardiac arrest, catastrophic, no warning. He was gone before the ambulance reached the end of their street. And just like that, Robyn went from being one half of something solid and good to being a widow with a half-finished mug of coffee going cold on the counter and an entire life that no longer made sense. The grief was enormous. She had expected that. What she had not expected was Stuart. Stuart Calloway was Malcolm's younger brother by 5 years, smooth-talking and perpetually sun-tanned in the way of men who spend a lot of time making deals on golf courses. He and Malcolm had been co-owners of Calloway Northern Timber, a mid-sized lumber operation their father Hugh had built from nothing in the 1970s. On paper, the partnership was clean. Malcolm had held a 60% share, Stuart 40. But Malcolm had always been the one who ran things, the one who knew every foreman by name, who walked the cut lines in the rain, who stayed late when the equipment broke down. Within 2 weeks of the funeral, Stuart had started making phone calls. The story he told, to the estate lawyer, to Malcolm's accountant, to anyone who would listen, was that Malcolm had verbally agreed, in the months before he died, to restructure the partnership, to give Stuart the controlling share. Stuart claimed Malcolm had felt guilty about an old dispute and wanted to make things right. He even produced a handwritten note, supposedly in Malcolm's handwriting, that outlined the terms. Robyn knew it was a lie. She had been with Malcolm every day of those final months. He had said no such thing. In fact, the last time Stuart's name had come up at their kitchen table, Malcolm had pressed his lips together in that particular quiet way he had, and said that Stuart was going to be a problem one day. But Robyn had no proof, and the estate settlement was scheduled for 2 o'clock that afternoon at the offices of Garnett and Associates on Elm Street in Sudbury, where a court-appointed administrator would formally assign the business assets. Stuart's lawyer was good. Robyn's lawyer was worried, and so at 6 that morning, unable to sleep, unable to sit still, Robyn had gotten into the Subaru and driven north on the old highway, the way she and Malcolm used to on Sunday mornings when they needed to think. She had not checked the weather forecast. That had been her first mistake. Now she stood in the ditch with ice pellets hammering her jacket, and the Subaru's front left wheel sunk to the axle in frozen mud. She had tried the phone twice. Nothing. She could walk back toward town, but 19 kilometers on an unlit secondary road in these conditions was not a walk. It was a gamble she would lose. The wind had teeth. She turned toward the tree line and the shape she had seen through the spruce. She wasn't sure what it was, only that it was man-made and upright, and right now those were the only 2 things that mattered. It took her 8 minutes to get through the ditch and into the trees. The spruce were dense, and the ground was a mix of wind-blown snow and old deadfall hidden underneath, the kind that grabs your boot and twists your ankle if you're not careful. Robyn moved slowly, arms out, her fingers going from painful to numb. The ice pellets drove sideways through the branches. She was shivering in waves, the kind that lock up your jaw and make it hard to think clearly. She almost walked past it. The structure was so thoroughly covered, snow packed heavy on the roof, spruce boughs pressing in on 3 sides, the whole thing half sunken into the hillside, as though it had grown there, that it barely registered as a building at all. It was maybe the size of a single-car garage built from squared-off logs gone silver-grey with age. A rusted stovetop pipe stuck up at one end. The door was low, barely chest-height, held shut by a loop of wire, rusted nearly to the colour of the wood itself. Robyn untwisted the wire with fingers she could barely feel, shouldered the door, and fell inside. The smell hit first, cedar and old ash and something sweetly rotten like dried apples going to compost. The dark was total. She patted down her jacket pockets and found, by luck, the small backup lighter she carried out of a habit her father had drilled into her as a child. Always carry fire, always carry a knife. The North doesn't care about your mistakes. She sparked it. The flame guttered, caught, and in its small orange light she saw a wood stove in the corner with a rusted iron door, and beside it, stacked neatly, enough split birch to last a week. She got the fire going on her third try, hands shaking badly, using shredded pages from a water-stained paperback she found on a shelf. The birch caught in minutes. The heat off the old stove was ridiculous and perfect, and Robyn sat on the plank floor 6 inches from it and did not move for a long time. When she had stopped shaking well enough to look around, she looked around. The cabin was simple. The stove, a wooden cot frame with a rotted canvas mattress, a shelf holding a row of ancient tin cans, a small square table, 2 wooden chairs. The logs of the walls had the hand-hewn look of work done before power tools were common, old work, good work. Whoever had built this place had known what they were doing. On the table was a tin box, the size of a shoebox, its lid sealed with electrical tape that had dried and cracked with age, and on the side of the box, in black marker gone pale with time, was a name. H. Calloway. Robyn stared at it for several seconds. Hugh Calloway, Malcolm's father. He had died in 2003, the year before Robyn and Malcolm married, which meant she had never met him. But Malcolm had talked about Hugh often, and always the same way, with a particular quiet reverence, like talking about someone whose shadow still fell on everything. Hugh had built Calloway Northern Timber out of a single skidder and a rented woodlot in the Shield country north of Sudbury. He had been, by all accounts, a serious and careful man, the kind who did not make mistakes. Robyn's hands were steadier now. She worked at the tape until it came apart in dry, brittle strips. The lid resisted, corroded at the seams, and she used the edge of a tin can to pry it open. Inside, wrapped in a sheet of oilcloth, were 3 things. The first was a journal, a small hardcover notebook, its cover warped but its pages protected by the oilcloth. Robyn opened it to the first entry. The handwriting was tight and deliberate, the handwriting of a man who had taught himself to print carefully, because he had not had much formal schooling and knew it. March 14, 1994. Caught Stewart going through the payroll files again. Asked him direct and he laughed it off. But I checked against the bank statements after, and $7,000 does not account for itself. I am going to say nothing yet. I am going to watch. She turned pages. September 3, 1994. It is worse than I thought. He has been skimming since 1991. I have the receipts now. I have the bank records. I cross-referenced everything. It is not small money. It is close to $60,000 over 3 years. I confronted him this morning. He cried. He said he was in debt, that he would pay it back, that it would destroy the family if I went to the authorities. I am a fool. I told him I would give him 1 year. More pages. February 2001. He never paid it back. He found other ways to take it instead, ways I cannot prove as easily. I have been quiet too long. I am putting this here because I am afraid of what I might do if I keep looking at it every day. But I am also afraid of what Stewart might do if he finds it at the house. The cabin is the only place he will never look. He has always hated the bush. And then, near the back of the journal, a single loose page folded in thirds, written in larger, more effortful letters, the handwriting of a man whose hands had been going by the time he wrote it. To whoever finds this, if Stewart has finally gone too far. The partnership agreement, The real one, the one I drew up with Martin Gerard at the firm in 2001, after I found out what Stuart was doing, is in this box. It gives Malcolm full controlling ownership upon my death, with Stuart retaining a non-voting 20% share only. Stuart has a copy of the original 1989 agreement, which he has always treated as gospel. He does not know about the 2001 revision. I never told him. I was waiting until I was ready to have that conversation, and then I got sick before I was ready, and then I ran out of time. But it exists. It is legal. It was filed with Martin Gerard, and it supersedes everything that came before it. If Malcolm has gone and Stuart is making his move, this is what stops him. The account records going back to 1991 are here too. Everything he took, everything I documented. God forgive me for being so quiet for so long. Hugh. The second thing in the tin box was a folded document on heavy cream-colored paper with an embossed letterhead. Gerard Professional Corporations, Sudbury, Ontario. The 2001 partnership revision. Signed by Hugh, signed by a witness, notarized. Malcolm's name was everywhere in it. Stuart's was barely present. The third thing was a manila envelope thick with photocopied bank statements, ledgers, and receipts. All of it dated between 1991 and 2001, all annotated in Hugh's careful handwriting. $60,000 in 1994. Then more, hidden differently across the years that followed. When Robyn added the figures Hugh had circled in red, the total came to well over $200,000. She sat on the floor of her father-in-law's forgotten cabin in the middle of a November ice storm and understood, with a clarity that felt almost like calm, that she was holding the answer to everything. She also looked at her watch. It was 9:47 in the morning. The signing was at 2 o'clock. If she wasn't at Garnett and Associates with this document before the administrator opened proceedings, Stuart would walk out of that office in control of everything Malcolm had spent his life building. Once the transfer was formalized, unwinding it would take years of litigation, if it could be undone at all. Robyn tucked the journal, the partnership document, and the manila envelope inside her jacket, against her body where they'd stay warm and dry. She added more birch to the stove to give the fire another hour of life, wrapped her scarf tight, and stepped back out into the storm. She moved fast, keeping just inside the tree line where the wind was slightly broken, walking parallel to the highway. Her legs ached. Her face went numb within minutes. She did not slow down, because slowing down was not an option. In 40 minutes, she reached the turnoff for the old Burwash settlement road, and 20 minutes after that, she saw the lights of the Petrocan through the trees. There was a payphone on the outside wall, an actual payphone, the kind she hadn't used since the late 90s. Robyn had a quarter in her pocket from God knows when. She called Paula. Paula Nakashima was 52, a property and estates lawyer with offices on Notre Dame Avenue in Sudbury, whom Robyn had hired 6 weeks ago, when it became clear that Stuart was not going to let the estate settle quietly. Paula was meticulous, unhurried, and possessed of a legal mind that made opposing counsel visibly nervous. She had been suspicious of Stuart's handwritten note from the day she first saw it. The language was wrong, she had said, too formal for a private conversation, too convenient in its specifics. 2 rings. Then Paula's voice already in work mode. Nakashima. It's Robyn. I need you to come to the Petrocan at Highway 17 and Burwash Junction right now. And Paula. I have Hugh's documents. The 2001 revision. I have everything. A pause. Say that again. Robyn said it again. A shorter pause. Don't move, I'm coming. Paula arrived in 40 minutes in a black Lexus, wearing a wool coat and an expression Robyn had not seen on her before. Controlled excitement. The look of someone who has been waiting a long time to play a card she didn't know she had. In the car, Robyn laid everything out on the back seat. Paula read the partnership revision first, holding it at arm's length, reading every clause twice. Then she read Hugh's letter. She set it down carefully. If Gerard's office filed this and it's in the county registry, it overrides the 1989 agreement entirely, Paula said. Stewart's claim collapses. There is no restructuring to negotiate. The structure is already defined. Can we get there in time? Paula checked her watch. If Gerard's office can pull the registry record in the next hour and transmit it digitally to Garnett. She was already dialing. Let me make some calls. They arrived at Garnett and Associates on Elm Street at 20 minutes to 2. The building lobby was the low-key, expensive kind, grey granite, potted ficus, that particular hush of a place where large sums of money change hands without anyone raising their voice. Stewart was already there, standing near the window in a charcoal suit, a take-out coffee in one hand, speaking in low tones with his lawyer. A composed young man named Aldridge, who wore his confidence like a second jacket. Stewart saw Robyn come through the door, and his expression moved through three things very quickly: surprise, irritation, and then, as he registered Paula beside her and the briefcase in Paula's hand, something closer to alarm. "This is a private settlement proceeding," Aldridge said, stepping forward. Mrs. Calloway was notified that her presence was optional. "My client's presence is not optional when the subject of the proceeding is her late husband's estate," Paula said, walking past him toward the administrator's desk. "And I have a legal instrument to enter into the record before this proceeding begins. I'm requesting a 30-minute delay." The administrator, a calm, heavy-set man named Douglas Ferris, who had been overseeing estate settlements in Sudbury for 20 years, looked at the document Paula placed in front of him. He read it in silence. Then he read it again. "Mr. Aldridge," Douglas said, without looking up, "I'm going to need you and your client to take a seat." Stewart set his coffee down on the side table without looking at it. "What is this?" His voice had gone very flat. The kind of flat that is not calm at all. "What is she doing?" "What I'm doing," Robyn said, "is what Malcolm would have done if he'd had time." Paula had already contacted Gerard's office from the car, and the registry confirmation came through on her phone at 1:52. Notary seals, a filing date, a record of a document that had existed for 20 years without the one man who most needed it buried ever knowing it was there. Stewart's lawyer asked for 10 minutes to confer with his client. Douglas gave them 5. The two of them stepped into the hallway, and through the glass partition, everyone in the room could see Stewart's face change color, and Aldridge make the gesture that is very clearly a lawyer telling a client there is nothing to be done. When they came back in, Stewart didn't sit. He stood near the wall with his arms crossed and said nothing while Douglas formally entered the 2001 partnership revision into the record, confirmed the registry filing, and stated for the transcript that the 1989 agreement had been superseded, and that Malcolm Calloway's estate held full controlling ownership of Calloway Northern Timber at the time of his death, passing to his surviving spouse in accordance with Malcolm's will. The claim Stewart had been building for 4 months was gone in 11 minutes. But that wasn't the end of it. 2 days earlier, quietly, before she knew anything about the cabin, simply on the basis of her own suspicion about the handwritten note, Paula had filed a complaint with the Ontario Securities Commission flagging the document as potentially forged. The commission had opened an inquiry, and the moment the 2001 revision entered the record, and the inquiry flag attached to the file, a plainclothes RCMP officer who had been sitting in the lobby reading a magazine stood up, walked into the room, and introduced himself to Stewart by name. Stewart Calloway was arrested at 2:11 in the afternoon in the lobby of Garnett and Associates on Elm Street in front of Douglas Ferris, his own lawyer, 2 paralegals, a receptionist who would tell the story for years, and Robyn. He was charged with fraud, forgery, and breach of fiduciary duty. The charges covered both the forged note and, as the investigation expanded over the following months, the decades-long pattern of financial theft that Hugh had documented in that oilcloth-wrapped journal. The legal proceedings took 8 months. Robyn did not enjoy a single minute of them, which was not the same as regretting them. Hugh had been meticulous. Every receipt, every cross-referenced bank statement, every annotated ledger page held up under scrutiny. Stewart was convicted on 9 of 11 charges and sentenced to 4 years in federal custody. Aldridge quietly transferred to a firm in Toronto. Robyn took the business. She hadn't expected to want it. She'd been a high school art teacher for 2 decades and knew nothing about lumber. But she found, once she was in it, that it was full of people who had loved Malcolm and were relieved beyond measure to have someone who intended to run it the way he would have. She promoted the operations manager, a 38-year-old named Bea Tremblay, who had been doing Malcolm's job for years without Malcolm's title, and together they steadied the company through the first difficult year. In the spring, Robyn commissioned the restoration of the old hunting cabin north of Sudbury. She had the structure stabilized, the stove cleaned and relined, the walls re-chinked. She had a small cedar plaque mounted beside the low door. Hugh and Malcolm Calloway, who built something worth keeping. She donated the surrounding land to the Sudbury Community Land Trust, with a conservation easement attached so that no one could ever develop it, and established a modest annual bursary for trades apprenticeships across northern Ontario, funded through the company's community commitment budget. She called it the Malcolm Calloway Memorial Award. The first recipient was a 19-year-old from Espanola who wanted to become an electrician. Robyn handed her the check at a small ceremony in the Calloway Timber boardroom, and she thought about a man who used to press his lips together in that particular quiet way when something troubled him, and who had been right, in the end, about everything that mattered. What would you have done, standing in that ditch with a dead phone and a storm closing in? Would you have walked into those trees? Sometimes the thing that saves you isn't what you were looking for. It's what someone else left behind, in exactly the right place, waiting for someone with enough reason to go looking. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Leave a comment telling us, what do you think Hugh would say if he could see how it all turned out? And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe to Claim the Drama. We'll see you next time.